Okay, can you hear me okay? I think we need to sort something out right up front. I'm not very good at German, and I don't understand this slide. It's either a very elaborate joke about me and Steve, or it was a question at a quiz at a recent conference. But I just wanted to point out that I am the other Steve C. And I have had followed Steve on the stage on a previous occasion, probably made that same comment. But so just to put it in context from what Hank has just said, I've been working in OpenStreetMap for quite a long time. I have done some work on the Mapnik styling, and I've worked with Frederick and Jochen on the English version of the excellent OpenStreetMap book, which you can get at this conference, end of adverts. What I'm going to do is I'm trying to convince you that OpenStreetMap is more than just a database, and the title was A Catalyst for Cartographic Revolution. Slightly ambitious title, and I hope that you'll make your mind up later on whether that's been reached or not. I could give you a lecture, I'm a cartographer, I could give you a lecture on the history of cartography. I won't, but I'll jump to about 1990 when web maps came into place. I was trying to get Mapquest were actually one of the biggest suppliers of web maps in the early days. I was trying to find an image of Mapquest's first static efforts. Couldn't find one. And then, lo and behold, I prepared this presentation, went to a conference last week, and someone was showing the very slide I wanted, but I couldn't get it off him, unfortunately. So what I'm saying is I'm going to take you through what has happened, perhaps as a result of OpenStreetMap being out there, and my point is that I think it's influenced other things in the cartographic world. So what this is one of the earliest illustrations I could find of maps from OpenStreetMap. And you can see it's pretty neat, but it could be a lot neater. And this is available as a resource. My slides usually have a reference to where they come from. But what happened was in February 2005, Google announced their map service. And it kind of changed things quite a lot because very shortly they had the ability to do panning and zooming actively on the Google tiles. And I again tried to find a very early Google image to show you, and I went back through some of the blogs and some of the archives, and all I could find was this reference to stuff that was happening, and the image seems to be not there. Now, conspiracy theory could be that it's a Flickr image and somehow Google had managed to decide Flickr was someone else and wasn't going to allow that to happen anymore, but we won't go there. So Google are starting to change things, and what had happened is that people were starting to use the Google Maps, and people in the OpenStreetMap project were beginning to realize that we need to move on. And one of the things that happened that allowed this to be was the arrival of OpenLayers. And I'll just leave you to read the comment from the OpenLayers blog about what OpenLayers purported to be and still does. And I think that's quite an important point, because the way that the tool works is actually influential in quite a strong way. And what happened was that some guys from Metacarta were at an O'Reilly conference, I believe it was, Aware 2.0, and decided to use this ability to produce an alternative to Google Maps. And this is where OpenLayers became one of the players in the field that I'm going to talk about. It's an open, you should know what OpenLayers is. I don't really need to tell you. It's an open source JavaScript piece of kit, but it does what it says on the tin, and it does it really well. So there are those in the project, the OpenStreetMap project, that maintain that it isn't actually a map, but it is actually a database. And you can kind of see that by the fact that there's two ways in. You can go in via the map URL, or you can go in via the wiki URL, and you get a slightly different perspective according to which one goes in. So even inside the project, there's a kind of a difference of opinion, perhaps, about whether it is or isn't. But what really was the game changer, as far as I'm concerned, was when Mapnik started being used in the project. And this is an illustration. I think somebody did a lot of this actual field work. He's probably in the room. Can't see him just now. But this is an early version of a Mapnik display from the project. And it was stuff that was designed to showcase what Mapnik could actually do. But what the problem is Mapnik's way of working is not simple, and anyone who's tried to work with it will know that. But it does produce a really good result. Anyone in the room know where that very important geographical location is that had a really big impact on the history of OpenStreetMap and cartography in general? One person in the room does, because he was at that particular occasion. What happened was that Steve Coast probably began to realise that we needed to shoot the cartography along a bit. And he knew that I was a cartographer working in the project and that Richard Fairhurst was. And so this is Richard's former residence in Charlbury in Oxfordshire, where we just got together, Steve Coast, Artem Pavlenko, Richard and myself, one day and just said, let's try and improve the way the cartography works in the project. And if you can imagine the situation, I took along a projector, we had a couple of laptops, and Artem with the code open, and me and Richard and Steve saying, oh, we could do this, we could tweak this, we could change this. And then Artem was changing the code and then reloading it and displaying it. And the style sheet was sufficiently small to allow that to happen. But the point was that we did a lot of interesting work and brought the thing along. What it also pointed out was that Artem was the only person really who had a deep knowledge of Mapnik, enough to affect what was going to happen. And what happened at that occasion was, I don't know what it was, but it tweaked my interests. I had no ability on the coding or other side. I had no understanding of what all this XML stuff was. But Artem convinced me to have a look at it and then apply myself to working on changing the way things looked. And I duly did that. And the nice thing is that there's been some really nice comments from people on that aspect. The first one is just a response to a video from, I think, a previous conference where someone's commenting on the video on it. And the second one, again, someone from outside of our normal sphere. It's the president of the British Cartographic Society saying that OpenStreetMap was an example of quality mapping on the internet. And it was at an occasion where there was quite a controversy going on, because she had publicly said at another conference that things like Google were missing out so many things that were important for cartography and for mapping. What I want to do is just show you a couple of examples of output from Mapnik. I'm not going to comment on the particular projects, but one of the points is a lot of variety. So the People's Map project, which may have seemed to be an interesting rival, perhaps, for OpenStreetMap, but has probably become moribund as far as I can tell from looking at it. But other things like every block in the UK, in the America, Afghanistan election, and even the London Organising Committee of the Olympic Games have used that tool in very interesting and different ways. And it's because it's there, and it's because it's available, and it's because it's good. And I say I've just chosen this example from an educational university institution in America, just to show the nice sort of stuff you can do. But what this website does is gives you the facts in the background. It's using Mapnik, it's using tile cache, and it's using OpenLayers. And they're the tools that are starting to change things, in my opinion. An interesting comment from Mike Magursky, who works at Stamen Design. I think Stamen were behind the Olympic map I showed you earlier on. And his comment is, it's the thing that makes OSM look so good, it probably wouldn't exist without OSM. So his feeling is there's a correlation and a relationship between the two things, which I think are so beneficial to what is happening. And Steve has made reference earlier on to Ordnance Survey changing the way things work. And it's significant, I think, that OpenLayers was the tool of choice when they released OpenSpace, and the illustration on the top right is another implementation of OpenLayers. And if anyone follows the guys from Ordnance Survey on Twitter, I think it's quite significant that the change in that the National Mapping Agency of the UK, should have had a hack day yesterday, and they were sitting with guys from the organisation trying to hack on the things that they're doing and doing things that we would recognise as the way that people work in the kind of the fields that we're familiar with. So another interesting aspect. But one of the things about the prevalence of OpenLayers is that people have decided that there could be room for more things in there. And one of the things that CloudMade, for instance, did was work on something called Leaflet. I don't know if anyone's looked at it, but I would suggest you have a serious look at it, because it's meant to be, as far as I can understand, a cut down and simplified, but a very fast and efficient implementation of the same sort of thing. And I was working on a project for my university that's implemented in OpenLayers, and with the colleague that I'm working with, who is also on the OpenStreetMap project, we're thinking of moving to Leaflet for that particular implementation. So again, perhaps there's a knock-on effect of these things. The guys from CloudMade have been, and still are in most cases, in the OpenStreetMap project. Okay, anyone recognise that stuff? Bit of code from the Mapnik style sheet. And that is just a bit that deals with a layer that's area text, another layer that's brought in for addressing because it's in a separate file, another layer of boundaries. It's frightening stuff in the way that it works at the moment, in my opinion. And so, another implementation, again from CloudMade, is the ability to the user, to edit the style of the map that you get. And this is the style editor from CloudMade, which allows the data to be displayed differently. I would criticise the fact that it's not totally open. You can't get at the style sheets. It delivers them as web tiles rather than a completely open implementation. But the point is, you can have a different looking map because that is there and that is available. And so, Google followed that trend. There's editable styles for Google. And I'd apologise if he was here to Dan Caron for picking a tweet from him, which fingers him as a Google user. But the point of his tweet is, it looks interesting, and those two on the right are two implementations of it. But I've not seen many customised maps on sites. And for me, that's a kind of feeling I have as well. I haven't seen very many customised versions of Google Maps appearing. But maybe I'm missing them, I don't know. But the point is that Google has decided that customisable styles is a way forward that they need to look at. Google's MapMaker tool, if you're familiar with it, is the ability to edit things into their database. But there's kind of flaws in it. I could pick holes in the whole thing. The illustration shows a plumbing and heating organisation, which is in a block of flats just over the road from me, which is illustrated in the little picture on the bottom right. That's not the main point. The point is that if you edit in MapMaker, your data then goes to Google. And if you're of the view that those things would be better in an open project like OpenStreetMap, then there's a slightly different feel to how that might be or how that might work or not work. Okay, Bing. One of the best things in my view of the Bing platform has been Streetside. And I just illustrate that because I really like it. And I would make the point that Bing has actually been quite slow at coming to the innovation table. There's been things that have been announced, and I think the announcement about Bing incorporated in OpenStreetMap was quite a good thing. Does have a problem about it, I think still does, if I'm not mistaken, rely on Silverlight for delivery, but that was a change that was welcomed by me at one level. Again, I would argue that it's because of OpenStreetMap being out there that Google, Bing, and as we'll see, other organisations are making changes to their models that they're using. An interesting one that Steve has already illustrated, I think, is Front Door. And again, as explained by Steve, it's a simple tool. But I'm a bit of a so what about that one, I'm afraid, and can't see it as a particular advantage or advance. But again, it's a thing that's happened probably because OpenStreetMap is there, and the argument is that the data goes to OpenStreetMap. I'm not altogether sure that that's a clear route that I've seen in place, but that's just my perception from where I sit. Another organisation, Mapquest, has opened up its way of working. And again, you might just like to take a moment to read that quote. This is probably about the time of last year's OpenStreetMap conference. That's a quote from one of the guys at Mapquest. And again, I applaud that thing happening from Mapquest. And again, it's embedded in the open version of the Mapquest site. I would criticise their route capabilities a bit because that's a route between my place of living in Enfield and somewhere over in Barnet, and it claims that I'm going to be able to do that in 14 minutes, which if I had a jet fighter I could probably just about manage, but not in my normal means of transport. But that's by the by. talking with some guys from Mapquest at the conference I was at last week, there are some things on the horizon that will be released and are coming shortly in that field as well. So watch that space. Anyone who works in the GIS field will know of Esri, and they've again taken a while to come to the table of change. But there's now an editor that you can edit directly into OpenStreetMap in ArcGIS. What I'd like to have done, and I can't do, I don't think, because we don't have audio here, would be to link to that Vimeo video that's there. And I'd recommend you to Google search for OpenStreetMap and Esri or Dangermond or something else, because it's the interview that I think it was Oliver did with him at a conference about a few months ago, and asked him some questions about why Esri were doing this and why Esri were doing that. And he gave some very interesting responses. And he ends up on this really positive soundbite saying that you guys are doing God's work, which is a kind of an American way of saying stuff. But it was just an interesting comment from the guy who is the main player in Esri. And if you're following Esri as an organisation, they are also opening up in quite a lot of different ways, which I find interesting and I'm sure are influenced by things that you and I know about that are happening. So, just to kind of summarise, there's various places that you can evangelise, and one of the things I try and do, because I work in the traditional cartographic field, is to talk to cartographers who are not involved in working in OpenStreetMap and not necessarily contributing. Go and evangelise about the good things that are happening. So there's things like Best of OpenStreetMap, and there's things on the wiki that say what the services are that are based on OpenStreetMap, and there's stuff on the wiki about the software. Go and talk to people about these things. And I would just like to say that I hope I've explained my view on how things in the OpenStreetMap community and the project have influenced other players. Some of the big players you might not thought of would change. And it's because of OpenStreetMap that I think there's just some superb cartography that's out there. And I'd just like to give you that example of one of my favourite pieces of most excellent cartography done by, I think, Tim Waters recently. Wouldn't be possible. So I'm going to actually wrap up there. I'm just going to say two more things. There are two URLs on the screen there. One of the things I was doing at the conference, the International Cartographic Association conference last week, was being nominated for my sins as chair of a commission of the ICA on neo-cartography. And I'm now going to be trying to spread the word about things that are happening in neo-cartography, not only OpenStreetMap, but other things that are happening, and get dialogues going. So if anyone is interested in that aspect of life, I've got a leaflet you can take, or you can come and talk to me outside of this presentation. I'd be really interested to hear from you. There's things that you can do. There might be work that you're doing that should be publicised. There might be things that you could contribute to workshops or whatever that are being organised. And it's actually, ICA are partly responsible for some of the things that are happening at this conference. And my co-chair is Manuela Schmidt, who I don't know if she's in the room at the minute, but is part of the organising team for this conference. And the other co-chair is Andrew Turner, as you should know, is a major player in the US and CEO, I think it is, of GeoCommons. And so there'll be some interesting stuff that we'll be doing to try and spread the word, talk about things that are happening in the industry, and also talk about things that you and I can influence in the industry. So please do talk to me or come and get a leaflet. And the last one is just a plug, really, for anyone who's in the UK or near the UK. There's a conference in September, the Society of Cartographers. I have a flyer for that if you're interested. And there's a lot of conversation that should be had. And people like Mookie, who will be talking to you later on, and Harry Wood and Tim Waters and various other people are speaking at that. But there's also a conversation to be had across the boundaries. And I would encourage you to have a look at that and see if it's something that you would be interested in. So on that note, there's my contact details, my Twitter account, my email. Please do contact me outside of this discussion if you want to talk about the things I've been talking about. Thank you for your attention.